Thanks so much, Alice. So welcome everybody to our 6th edition of our QI on the Fly web meeting series. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, welcome. And for those of you that have participated in our previous QI on the Fly web meetings, welcome back. Happy to have you all join us for the hour today. Focus of this meeting is on process mapping, and we'll be doing an encore presentation in August, just recognizing that lots of folks are on vacation this time of the year. We just go to the next slide. So as Alice mentioned, we are recording this meeting and we will be sharing on our website, YouTube, and promoting through our Twitter. So just a quick review of the Zoom controls. If you wish to show your camera, just click on the little camera icon in the bottom left, and you can control whether or not you're speaking using your audio, using the little microphone. So if you don't see the red line through it, then your audio is on and you can speak. And if you click on it, you'll see the little red line, and that means that you are muted. We just go to the next slide. And in the bottom left, you'll see the little chat bubble there. So if you do have a question throughout the presentation, we ask that you do use the chat function to ask. I believe Chris is monitoring the chat.
Yeah, I'm here.
Just ask that you use, thanks, Chris. So if you just use the chat function as opposed to using the audio, that would be really great, but rest assured we will address your question throughout our web meeting today. Just go to the next slide. So this is a recap of the impetus for our QI on the Fly web series. As we all know, we're living in unprecedented times with many competing priorities. We know that a lot of agencies are balancing safety for everybody, staff, clients, tenants, family members, with delivering program services that are essential to those that we're honored to serve. We know that we are hearing of creative approaches, which are essentially change ideas that are being implemented very quickly in a rapidly evolving environment. And they're being changed as you gather data and input from your team members, clients, and tenants about what changes are working and what need further tweaking. And we know that some of these change ideas will continue after the COVID pandemic is over as sort of a new normal, if you will, and others are more relevant to our current environment and they won't continue beyond COVID-19. Just go to the next slide. So today's panelist is Alice Strong, Quality Improvement Integrated Care Specialist at Ontario Health. We're very pleased to have Alice walk us through our web meeting today. She's very knowledgeable and a great facilitator. So welcome, Alice, and thank you.
Thanks,
and
Ashley.
We're joined, no problem. And I know we have some friends from our E-QIP team as well. I see Laura and Deb. I know Chris is here. And I believe we have a few other folks, Rishi, one of our coaches, and I believe Amy is on the call as well. So we're all here for you today if you wish to ask us any questions. We could just go to the next slide. Perfect. So this will be familiar to some of you and maybe not so much for others. But on the left, we have our model for improvement. This is what we use as a basis for quality improvement work. And on the right, we have our recently developed QI on the Fly template. This is something that we developed with COVID-19 to help capture the quick QI work that we know is taking place. And I'll be sending out a copy of this template after the meeting is over, very likely tomorrow with the link to the recording of the session. And if you would like assistance filling out one of these templates, please do reach out to us either to myself or our general inbox, quality@eqip.ca. And for today's presentation with process mapping, you'll find ourselves in the how do we know that change is going to be an improvement. So we're in the measuring and understanding your system part of the model for improvement. Just go to the next slide. And I believe at this point, I am handing things over to Deb, who's going to recap what we covered in our last web series.
I think I am Deb. Is that right? Debbie had a little look of surprise there. So yeah, that's that's okay. So I'm happy to do this. Thanks, Deb. I know you would have done a great job. So those of you who were with us for webinar number 5, you will remember it was focused on experience-based design in COVID times, and it was a partner, a cousin, if you like, to webinar number 4, which talked about the theory of experience-based design. And webinar number 5 was about some practical application of the elements of experience-based design so that we could continue to engage with clients and frontline staff virtually to collect information for our diagnostic phase. We looked at displaying the data visually and talked about designing together, that in these times where we can't be face-to-face, things are beginning to open up, I recognize, but face-to-face is still challenging. We just wanted to reaffirm the importance of continuing to engage with clients and frontline staff, but also to help you to see how you could continue to do that. And we have heard anecdotally from some people that actually they feel like they're getting I won't say higher engagement, different engagement, but good engagement, even though it's virtual. In some cases, they have found it easier to schedule. They found it easier to bring larger groups together. And so, you know, there is a plus side, and then in some cases, this virtual environment is allowing us to collect information, albeit in a different way, but perhaps from people who may or may not have contributed before. So just to recap, we talked about emotional mapping and related it to process mapping. I'm going to show you a little bit more about this in this demonstration today. We used the example of going to the grocery store. We did a very practical application of what would you be feeling at those different phases within going to the grocery store. We talked about how you feel when you get there, how you feel when you shop, and how you feel when you drive home. We talked about some use of some Zoom tools in order to be able to help us to still engage, one around polling. So we did a little demonstration of polling. We played around with the reactions buttons, which I saw some of you using your reactions buttons this morning as well, so that's great. Zoom has slowed down, I would say, their enhancements, because I really expected to see some more reactions buttons, but I haven't seen them yet. I'm sure they're coming, but just an easy way. And for those of you who weren't on the call, we talked about renaming yourself so that if you were asking to some generic name, and we used Mickey Mouse, which was my reference at the beginning, and we talked about that being a way to anonymize feedback. So if you didn't really need to know who said very good or good, get everyone to change their name and just count the number of hands clapping or thumbs up. We talked a little bit about the ability to whiteboard, you know, how to use a blank PowerPoint slide, sharing screen, those sorts of things. And you know, I mentioned during that session, just think about Zoom as the projector you used to have in a meeting room. And today I'm going to say I'm thinking about Zoom and my computer screen as all of you sitting out there, just like we would be in a meeting room, and show you how to be able to process map. And we talked a little bit about add-ins, some polling software. People shared some software that they had used. Some of these are free, some of them have a small charge, but you know, if there are many people who are seeing the advantages of the work that they have done virtually, the work that we have been forced to do, and many who are seeing, as Ashley mentioned in that initial slide, that some of these things we may continue to do. And so it may be worth the investment, whether it be time or a learning curve, to begin to use some of these other kinds of software. If this is something that you're going to continue to do, if you've had good success, why not? You know, we maybe didn't know that it was broken, but maybe it was, and now we fixed it, and we want to continue to be able to do those things. So that's just a quick recap on experience-based design, and those slides and the tools and resources that were associated with those are available on the E-QIP website. So today is about creating a process map and understanding how it contributes to your quality improvement diagnostic journey. I'm probably going to say this 3 or 4 times during the webinar today, but this sounds funny. The process of creating the process map is not the important part. The important part is understanding how it contributes to your quality improvement diagnostic journey, and the importance of the conversations that you will have both while you are process mapping, those aha moments, and the ability to engage people to share with you from their perspective, their experience, how a process really works. And how it really works is what we're interested in. not how it works in nice straight rows and lined up boxes and straight arrows. We want to know how it works on Monday. We want to know how it works when half the staff are on holidays. We want to know how it worked the day that you had to switch to 100% virtual care because we went into our pandemic situation. We want to know how it works when you're launching a new program. We want to know how it works for real. And part of that is understanding who should be involved in your process mapping and how to get maximum involvement. It's really, really important that we get people who know this. And you know, you may say, well, you know, I don't really want to, not sure if I'm ready to deal with how our clients feel about the process. I challenge you and say, yes, you are, because that's what's really important. And there might be some bumps, but you need to understand those bumps so that you can work to smooth them. We're going to process map, and we're going to spend a little bit of time at the end thinking about the value of using process mapping with your OPOC data. How does it fit with what you're doing in your quality improvement projects now? So a couple of phrases or quotes, I should say, that I really like to keep in mind as I do any of this diagnostic work. One is the one down on the bottom left-hand, or sorry, bottom right-hand corner. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. So whenever we start to encounter these situations where things aren't working, and if they aren't working on a consistent basis, then you have a system that's reinforcing that. You have a system that is built to make the wrong way, or the less efficient way, or the less effective way, the easy way. So of course we continue to do it because it's easier and the system supports it, and you know, it's all good. And I think, you know, if there's one thing we can take away from our pandemic times, we have learned a lot about systems, and we have learned a lot about the way in which systems are designed and how the design of a system does directly affect the results. The other thing to think about when we process map is that what we're looking for is what is our future state. We are trying to understand the current so that we can improve it to get to future state. If we process map, we will always be able to find something that offers us a level of improvement. But we do want to make sure that we understand the current state so we can think about future state. So Edison's electric light did not come from the continuous improvement of candles, but I'm sure it did come from understanding how candles worked and how that could be improved upon from the perspective of being able to provide light in a safe, continuous way, which would have led to the future state around thinking about a light bulb versus a candle. Process mapping, sometimes you don't know what current, or sorry, what future state might look like. And so just the basis of going through the process map helps you to take that pause and think about, we've always done this and it's painful, like for Edward Bear coming down the stairs. And we want to have a chance to stop bumping. Bumping is what we do when we continue to exist in a painful process, painful for us, painful for our clients or our tenants. And process mapping gives us that pause to reflect and think about, there probably is another way, and you want to stop bumping for a minute and thinking about that. It is grounded in the model for improvement, as Ashley pointed out at the beginning. When we're process mapping, we are focused on trying to understand more about what is possible, the future state. We want to know more about what changes we could make that would result in an improvement. And we want to know about how will we know. And as we process map and we begin to work with the process map that we've developed, we will begin to layer on things that look at data and measures and help us to understand what does better look like and how will we know when we get there, or how will we know when we're on our way. And so here's the QIOnTheFly template. Just wanted to relate the model for improvement to that template in another way. So when we talk about what are we trying to accomplish, it directly relates to our conversation in the QIOnTheFly template around our problem statement. And the looking at the understanding of our problem statement and the beginnings of our diagnostic process. When we think about how will we know that change is an improvement, that's reflected in our measurement section on our QIOnTheFly template. And what changes can we make that will result in improvement shows up again in our understanding of the diagnostics that we're doing, and also in our what other changes possible that we could make. So that model for improvement is directly reflected in our QIOnTheFly template. And then you have the ability to document your changes, because the one thing we always want to remember is no matter what we're doing in quality improvement, it is about learning. And the way in which we learn is we document what works, we document what doesn't work, and we try it again. So what's a process map? I think you all know the answer to this. It's a visual representation of the steps in the process of a patient's journey, or a client's journey, or a tenant's journey, or maybe it's a staff person's journey. Maybe you're process mapping something internal to your organization. It helps you to keep that system focused and understand the system you are focusing on. And this is really important. So we don't want to get too far down in the weeds at first, but a process map may identify what weeds we want to get down into. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. And, you know, it helps us to visually depict whether a process is working or not. Sometimes we know something just doesn't feel right. We know it just doesn't seem to be efficient or effective. And we know it's producing lots of complaints, as an example, but we don't really know why. And so visually depicting that process will help us to understand why. And it, you know, it's one of our strong diagnostic tools, and it can help us to relate to those other tools, such as root cause, where we can begin to dig in a little bit more, 5 whys, developmental problem statements, those other types of good QI tools. One of the other really important things about a process map, as I mentioned earlier, it's about the conversations that you will have while you are process mapping and while you reflect on the process map you have created. And it ensures that everyone has the same understanding of the process. And this is important, and not important from the perspective that you're going to try and teach people about your process. They're going to teach you about your process. The people that you process map with are going to teach you again about what happens on Monday, what happens when everybody goes on holidays, what happens after a holiday Monday, what happens when we had to shut down for COVID. They're going to help you to understand the day-to-day nuances that you probably don't know about, because those people who know about those day-to-day nuances, they figured out workarounds. What those workarounds do is they actually hide what's really happening from you as the person who may be trying to improve the process, but they are a heck of a lot of work for the people who are doing them. And one of the dangers of workarounds is, particularly if the workarounds belong to one person, is that the day that that one person is off, or the week they go on holidays, or the day they retire, those workarounds will no longer be there, and the system will crash, and you won't understand why that suddenly happened. It does help to identify opportunities for improvement. It will tell you where your pain points are, and it will help you to understand pain points that are under your control. And a little bit more about that in a moment. Helps to understand common understanding of roles and responsibilities. I'll show you a format of a process map that delineates that. And it can help you to talk about an improved future state process. And some people like to map future state processes as well. I like to spend the majority of my time on current state, really understanding the problem, and try some tests of change before we get to future state, because again, it's about learning. And what we think right now might be better, maybe we need to learn a little bit more before we determine what better looks like. Some people talk about process mapping and value stream mapping. There is a difference. A process mapping is just a very simple graphical representation of the steps that are involved in a process or a portion of a process. And it really just gives you that overall very high level, this is where the process works, this is where it does not. A value stream map talks more about flow, productivity, use of materials, return on investment, profit loss, those kinds of elements, and it looks at specific data associated with each step. So as opposed to in a process map, we would say we do step A and then we do step B, a value stream map would look at the time between step A and step B, and they might look at the volume that moving from step A to step B produces. They might talk about the resources that are involved. They might count the number of errors that happen between step A and step B. Value stream mapping certainly has its place in improvement. But if you've not done a process map at all, I would suggest that you start with a process map. And from the work that I've done in my experience, a process map for me is good enough for quality improvement. When you get a really good, well-functioning future state established, so it becomes your current state, and you want to refine and define and delineate, you might want to look at a value stream map at that point. But unless productivity is really your goal, a value stream map has its place, but it's not as important in quality improvement. There are basically 3 types of process maps. I'll show you one of each. There is a high level, step A, step B, step C, step D, etc. Least defined just gives you a good overall perception, good place to start. Let's make sure we all see the overall process the same way. Then we can get into a detailed process map, and that will be to take one or more of the steps from the high-level process map and dig down into it. This is the weeds. And the weeds will show you more weeds, by the way. But a detailed is into the weeds, and you can detail upon a detail, which gets you down into more and more weeds. But it helps you to focus in on where your specific opportunities for improvement lie, so where you might want to put your efforts. And a swim lane map talks about the different functions and people that are involved in a detailed process map. And it will help you to see some of the complexity of your process that may not always show up in a nice straight line process map. A swim lane map will show you a lot about where there is a lot of back and forth, duplication, rework, transportation, those lean principles will show up in a swim lane map. So some of you have maybe, thought about very high level. Here is a very high level process map, how to play Pictionary. You draw a picture. Do they get it? Yes, no. If they get it, you win. If they don't get it, you keep repeating and point repeatedly at the same picture, and hopefully eventually they'll get it. Now, if you were trying to improve your playing of Pictionary, I would suggest that you would want to focus on dig down into this point repeatedly to the same picture part of the process, because I think that's where your problem lies. But if your process map showed that, people are getting it, you are winning, good on you, it's all good to go. Let's look at a more realistic one, perhaps. Some of you will remember the garbage example that we followed through in a couple of our previous webinars. And here's a high-level map of the waste disposal process within a household. So we purchase food and other household supplies, we prepare them, we consume the food and supplies, we dispose of the leftovers and materials, we organize that waste for disposal, we put the waste out at the curbside for pickup, and the town vendor comes and collects the waste. That's our very high level. But what if we wanted to focus in on some improvement around disposing of the leftovers and materials? We might say, okay, let's do a more detailed in the weeds version of that third step of disposing of leftover materials. So here you see our high level process map up the top, and you might not bring it over like I did here, but I was just trying to show you the connection. And now that level 3 of actual disposal of the waste materials and leftovers is broken down into a more complex, detailed map, the weeds, if you like. And you see a number of opportunities, perhaps in the weeds, where you might see opportunities for improvement. If we were curious about the work of disposing of leftovers and materials, we might do a swim lane map. So the swim lane map does is it takes that exact same process that you saw here, and it breaks it down by who. So in this case, I've got mom, I've got family, I've got child A and child B. And if we were trying to look at our process and see how the workflow worked and the responsibility worked, you can begin to see a couple of things that you didn't necessarily see in this map up here, one of which jumps off the page. If I were child B, or sorry, child A, I'd probably have a bit of an opinion about how much more I was doing than child B. That may be part of the conversation that comes out. You'll begin to see that there's some circular process in here where things are happening more than once. And, it seems like putting out the garbage is pretty simple. So we probably don't have a lot of opportunity there, but this, clears the table, places it in the recycle bin, places the garbage. There's a lot of steps in here that the family is responsible for. This might suggest that there's an opportunity for improvement. So just another way. If you have Visio, Visio is an amazing product to be able to complete these swim lane maps. You can do it in Excel, though. It doesn't have to be fancy, and you can draw it out. That's the beauty of a process map. You just draw it. Here's a very simple drawn out process map. If you were the family that drew this, you would probably see that this has to do with shopping, I believe, and ordering and all of those kinds of things, but just completely drawn out, not even worried about names or boxes or any of those things. And that's okay. As long as that makes sense to you, that's okay. So just before we get into our actual process mapping exercise, there are some commonly agreed upon symbols in process mapping that you can use. An oval is commonly agreed upon as a start and end point. A decision point, usually a yes or no, is a triangle. And the best part about a triangle is, as we know, it's just a square turned on its corner. And so if we're using Post-it notes, we can easily make a triangle or a semi-triangle just by turning our box on its end. A step in the process is a rectangle or a box, a square. An arrow is a connector. And a document with some sort of, or sorry, a symbol with some sort of wave in it, sometimes it has this double wave, sometimes it just has a single wave, is usually considered a document or a data repository, whatever that might mean. And so if you're looking at data collection as part of your process, you will bring in those data that data symbol or that document symbol at places where you're interested in the way in which it's documented or data is recorded. So before we get into our own little process map here, when we build a process map, we want to make sure we assemble the right group. We want to make sure we have everybody from the various disciplines who have the knowledge of the day-to-day workings of the process. And today we chose a process to map that we hope, we think, we believe, most of you have had some experience with, or at least thought about. You need to agree on the scope, the first and last steps to be mapped. A little bit more about that now. Look at what's happening 80% of the time. Don't get down in the weeds too quickly. Don't focus on exceptions. Don't focus on the one-ofs that only happen on April 1st every year. Think about what happens 80% of the time. Map actual, not ideal. Be brutally honest about how it does or doesn't work. Include the amount of detail necessary to support improvement activities and validate and finalize the map by consensus. Make sure you go back to the people who helped you to create the map to validate that it is what you actually thought it was going to be. So let's process map here. Let's stop sharing. And now you're seeing me, I hope. Is that correct? Are you seeing me? Can somebody give me a thumbs up if you're just seeing me now? Yes? Oh, I'm not getting any thumbs up. Oh, yes. Okay, thank you. So we are back on my dining room wall again. So this is how you can process. And by the way, you know, if you have a nice wall, it doesn't, you don't have to say it's your dining room wall. You might want to say that it's actually a boardroom. All I've done here is that I've got chart paper up on a wall. I'll remind you of a couple of things if you're using your own home. One is this green painter's tape. That'll work for Canadian Tire or whoever makes this lovely Scotch brand tape. Doesn't take the paint off. So if you're using your own wall, you probably want tape. The other thing to think about is that you want markers that aren't going to make your process map permanent on your wall. I don't work for Mr. Sketch, but I know that these do not leave that on your wall. Oh, Laura, thank you for that. If you click on speaker view, yes, you will get just me. I will be here. Thank you. So we chose today to demonstrate for you, we want your engagement, your participation in the chat box. We chose today to process map getting a coffee and in current times. And so remember the first thing I said that you need to do when you process map is you need to think about what's your start point, what's your end point. And so we chose our start point to be the fact that we decide that we want a coffee. That's what that says way over there. And we wanted our end point to be that we're actually drinking the coffee over there. So here we're started. I want a coffee and I'm going to drink the coffee over at the end here. So that's what our process map looks like to start with. So help me by participating in the chat box, and Chris is going to read out loud to me some of the things that you are going to share with us, and tell me some things that you think about in that process of wanting coffee. So just to get started, we thought about the fact that we've got some options here. You might want to drive, and I'm going to be a Tim Hortons fan here. It's not Tim Hortons. You might want to drive to Tim Hortons. You might want to order online. Maybe you're going to use Uber Eats and order your coffee. So now, if I were, one of the things I want to say about the start and that I chose I want a coffee to drinking coffee because I am trying to improve my process of getting a coffee, and I have control, ownership, ability to influence everything in between when I identify that I want a coffee and when I actually drink the coffee. If I were Tim Hortons and I was mapping this process, I might not start over here because I don't really control whether or not somebody drives to Tim Hortons, uses Uber Eats. Maybe I do if they order online because maybe I want to make that process better. But one of the things to think about when you think about your start and end point is what do you have control over? All right, so let's assume that we decided that we're going to drive to Tim Hortons. Tell me the next, what happens now? We're going to drive to Tim Hortons. So we get to the Tim Hortons. What's the next step?
There was a point made just a moment ago from Judy about one needs to perhaps check their schedule for what kind of time they have available to do that.
Yeah, okay, so one of the decision points that you might want to think about right off the start is time. Okay, so let me make up a real quick little decision point here. And you would stick that right in here, right? Like, do I have time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
so that might lead me to Uber Eats because I need it delivered. Yeah.
given current events and the current situation that we're in, if someone is with another person in their car, you know, are they masked up? Do they have a mask? Did they forget a mask? And how does that affect?
Mask or no mask is a decision point, right?
Yeah. How does that affect the acquisition of coffee?
Yeah, because let me show you where that might go. So that's interesting, right? So you're in the car, you have a mask, you're driving it, well, you could put this here, right? You could say, oh, well, you know, we're not quite used to this mask thing yet. So we're thinking about whether or not we have a mask after we've already gotten in the car. Okay, that is going to affect our ability to go or go through the drive-through.
Right.
Because
if you're in Kingston and you want to walk into the store, you need to have a mask. But I'm not so sure you need a mask for the drive-through. I'd have to double check on that. But it's another sort of decision, I guess, that is affecting all of this.
Yeah. So if I've decided to drive, I don't have a mask. That means I've got to go through the drive-through. Now my next step is going to be to order. Right?
Yeah.
But I could have also had another point, depending on how close I live to the Tim Hortons. Way back here, I might have been deciding whether I was driving or walking to Tim Hortons. Depends on how close I live and whether or not it's feasible for me to have time. That goes back to the time question again, to walk or drive to Tim Hortons. What else would I do? So I've gone in, I'm going to say I don't have a mask. So I've gone through the drive-through, I've ordered. What comes next?
Well, some prior to that decision might be, well, what is it I'm ordering? What exactly am I going to choose? I guess we could get really into the details here about types of coffee and what you want in the coffee and so on. I mean, you could have, as you demonstrated a moment ago, a process map inside a process map about especially if you went to Starbucks, Alice, this would be an explosion upon explosions of options and choices. To consider, Tim Hortons has less of that to choose from.
You'd have a decision point of do you speak Starbucks or not?
Right.
If you don't, you know what? If you could play around with this, if you went to Starbucks, what name are you going to put on the cup, right? So you probably, and now that you think about it, this is the other beauty of doing a process map in this way, right? The reason why I've chosen, I'm in the drive-thru going to order. Wait a minute, I need to know what I'm going to order before I order. So I've got to do these in a different things, right? I need to understand what it is I want before I can actually order. So I order, and then what do? Probably I pay, right?
So a decision point is, what's my method of payment going to be?
Yeah. How do I pay, right? We got to figure that out before you can pay. So, you know, are you handing over cash? Are you using your tap? Does your tap work? Like, think about, you know, this simple little process of going and getting a coffee is becoming exhausting, right? So is it cash? Is it tap? Does your tap work? All kinds of things to think about. All right. Cash, is it tap? Does it work? Yeah, and you can pay. Right? After you pay, what do?
The chat box is open for suggestions. We wait. Someone says, Debbie says, we wait. We anticipate, an anticipation with.
Well, you know, that's a good point, Debbie. And so one of the things that we might want to do here is we might want to say, you know, there's a wait here. And we might want to do something like this, right on a process map that says, you know what, that right there, there's a wait. Not sure what that means yet, but that's a way. And you might want to pay attention to that. Pick up our coffee. I'm going to move my drinking. Pick it up. Whoops, we drive home. We go inside. And we follow along the floor. And we drink our coffee. Yeah, so, sorry, yeah, Chris.
Another suggestion that, well, you know, if it's a drive-through, there's an order window and a pickup window. Tim Hortons pretty much has just one window, does it all, but you never know, they may have different arrangements. You may need to make accommodation inside your vehicle if you are driving to be able to put the coffee down while you can drive back to your destination. Perhaps while visiting Tim Hortons, you may peruse their menu for the time you're there, or another visit about what other products might be available for you to consider next time.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, it seems pretty simple on the surface to be able to go and get a coffee, but when we begin to look at it, now we think about what are the opportunities for improvement. So, you know, I think right back here in this time, yes, no. So that's where we have an opportunity in this process map to think about, all right, if sometimes I have time and sometimes I don't, what's my go-to when I don't have time? Do I order online? How much time does that save me? If I order online, do I now have to go in? If I go in, I have to make sure I have my mask. You can start to rearrange. Like if I said, okay, I'm going to order online, I still, with my card in Tim Hortons, I still have to go mask or no mask, but I think I have to have a mask if I've ordered online, because I think if I order online, I have to go in. So
I think that's true. I don't think you can necessarily show up at the window in a car if, but I could be wrong on that.
Yeah. So, you know, it does take out this order step, but you still have to pay unless you pay it online with your card. So it helps in some cases, but it doesn't help in others. And if you were Tim Hortons, that might be where you'd be interested in process mapping. You may not have a lot of ability to control necessarily what happens over here. Once this decision has been made, people begin to interact with your franchise. Tim Hortons would be very interested in, you know, sort of from here to here, right? They would be very interested in what happens when you're on their property, and they would probably want to dig down more into the detail of what happens in that environment. You may be more interested in what happens, you know, in this space here from the start to when you actually go, because this is where time becomes a factor and all of those kinds of things. You know, you might also be very interested in what happens in your drive home piece, because maybe that's where you justify the fact you went to get a coffee because you do another errand on your way home, whatever the case may be. But where you dig down, the point of all that is where you dig down is where you see an opportunity for improvement over which you have some ability to influence or control. So,
Here's a comment, Alice. I guess it's a suggestion, a decision point, that is eliminating drive-through because car idling promotes pollution and all that goes with it.
You know, that's an excellent point. So that's an excellent point. If my desired improvement was environmentally focused,
right, then
I would be very interested in this drive or walk. I would be very interested in that drive-through and idling. And I might be very interested in another in this process map around what kind of container I would use. Although right now you can't use your refillables, but in
that's right, yeah,
unquote normal times, we could use our refillables. So if my purpose were environmentally focused, then I would be process mapping and looking at different opportunities for improvement.
Exactly. Yeah.
What's important about this too is that in doing this, you would be wanting to make sure that you all see this in the same way, whoever you all is, your family, you and your coworker, whoever it is, so that you would agree that if you had opportunities for improvement, so if your goal was to be able to have coffee more often during the day, where are the opportunities for improvement? If your goal was to limit your, let's say, you know, we are focused on COVID. If your goal were to limit your amount of face-to-face, And, you know, you'd be looking purely at the drive-through option and how could you improve that? And maybe that's where, you know, that takes ordering online out. The point is to have the conversation with the people around you who would be interested in this. The other thing that's really important when you do a process map is to do exactly what I'm going to do right now, which is to take a picture of it. Or when you're done for now. Because as much as, so, you know, you just take a picture on your phone, there it is. This now gives you the ability to not only be able to document what you do, okay, this is where we started the improvement opportunities. It allows you to engage with others who weren't there that day. So you might say, you know, the group, the day that we wrote process map, they really wanted to focus on this wait part here and think about how they could decrease the amount of time that they wait for coffee. So we'd like your reaction to the map as we mapped it. And we'd like you to tell us where you see your opportunities for improvement in it. And then do it again, and do it again, and do it again, and do it again. In my experience, I normally don't take a process map to any sort of Visio or Excel version until we're pretty darn close to agreeing that that's current state. And that is what we're beginning with. Because the ability to, you know, move all these around is really instrumental, and it helps people. If you give people something on paper that it looks permanent, this doesn't look permanent at this point, right? And we don't want it to look permanent yet because we're really just thinking about it. So, you know, allowing people to move things around. I worked with a group at one point in time that did a process map like this with the students, took a picture of it, and then in, you know, normal times, they posted it in the hallway to their staff room. And they encourage people, they put, you know, some more stickies in the bottom corner, and they hung some markers off it, and they encourage their staff to move the stickies around and to write on it, to make it messy, to draw lines, do whatever they want to do. And they went each day and took another picture so that they kept the history of it. And then they all came back together and worked together again to create another group process map. And it was very successful, and people felt very engaged. One of the other things about process mapping is that you want people to see themselves in the process because you want them to or not. And it's okay for people to understand, you know what, I have nothing to do with the wait time piece here. So I'm not going to engage in this particular part of the process improvement because I'm not engaged in that. However, let me know when you get to this piece here, because I would like to be heavily engaged in that piece.
So to go back to your example about the family and garbage, I mean, in a real life scenario, you would want the family members to participate collectively, be present, and when it's time for them to speak about their particular role in the map that laid out, you know, that's where they can really add value, right?
Yes, and I'll share, at the risk of sharing too much information, I'll share a real life example around that. I mentioned earlier to folks around earlier webinars that we actually did that garbage waste reduction project in our own individual homes when we were coaching the advanced learning program. And so we each did it in our own way with our own families. And one of my colleagues in process mapping, it all looked beautiful from the process map. We had child A, child B, we had all those things mapped out. But when the family actually went to draw out the process, what came out was that the child who had been assigned the green bin responsibilities, and this did not show in a process map on its own. This is the value of the discussion that you have around the process map. Really had a very visceral reaction to the smell of the green bin. And so, although it looked great, it was all mapped out, child A did this, child B did that, stuff went in the green bin, it was beautiful. What they found through the discussion of the process map is that the one child could not do the green bin part because she had such a visceral reaction to the smell of the green bin. That wouldn't have shown in the little boxes, but by doing the boxes, it enabled that conversation where she could say, I can't do this part. It makes me wretched. So, you know, it really emphasizes the visual is important. The understanding of the steps is important. The agreement that this happens 80% of the time is important. But what's really important is the conversation you have about how you're going to improve it.
That's some good insight. Thanks for that.
Any other comments, questions? Everybody wants a coffee now. All right.
Just going back to the family garbage example, I like if there is a dad in that scenario, I like the way it came out for him. Really little, if anything, to do. So it worked out well for him, selfishly speaking.
Yeah, yeah, that might have been by design too, right? Absolutely, absolutely. So, you know, just to re-emphasize this again, you know, having the right group of people is really, really important. You want people who know what it's like to go and get a coffee. You want the people who are involved in your waste disposal, the people who are triaging at your front desk, whatever the case may be. The scope's important, and make sure that it's scope that's under your control. Or if not, and maybe your first swipe at this, you might go broader and actually have some things in it that are not under your control, but only because that will enable you to be able to narrow to the piece of the map that you're going to be able to work on. Don't try and map something over which you can't control. Lots of times we would talk with teams about projects, and you know, they were a primary, you know, well, they were a hospital who wanted to improve their discharge process back to primary care. Well, we needed to have, you know, somebody from primary care involved in that project to be sure that we could influence both pieces of this process. It's the same. If you're mapping a process that's interdepartmental or interagency, don't try and affect somebody else's process unless they're part of your project with them. Yeah, yeah. So if you were going to try and map something that was larger like that, you need to enlarge your group, or use that big scope to start with, but focus down on the part of that transition that is that provides an opportunity for you. Remember, 80%, not the one-offs, not what happens April 1 or December 31st or any of that kind of stuff. Map actual, not ideal, and don't be afraid, don't rush it. Don't be afraid to go back to it and say, well, wait a minute, what if my tap doesn't work? What if this doesn't work? What if I want to walk? And show it to others. You know, make sure other people agree this is what it looks like when you go to Tim Hortons to try and build confidence. All right, so hopefully that was a good little practical demonstration of the value of process mapping. Just want to give you a chance to tell us a little bit about any process mapping that you may have done relative to your OPOC data. So using the chat box for a moment, can you tell us if there's any processes that you either have already mapped relative to OPOC or that you're considering mapping? And Chris will be glad to read those examples out to us.
Comment from Beth about discharge processes, probably in the southwestern part of Ontario. There is a collaborative working on common responses to discharge. So that seems to be a popular one. Also, and I know in Champlain area, a similar examination is taking place.
And what's always important in a discharge process is that particularly if you're mapping the transition around discharge, thinking again about what part of the process is under your control, or who else do I need to engage with, so that we do have some ability to influence or affect that actual discharge transition. That's what's really important. You can only affect or influence what is under your organization's control or purview. Yeah, that's a good example.
Debbie's aware of an agency mapping out their intake process to, I guess, shine some light on length of time from OPOC. I don't know if, Debbie, you could finish that thought, length of time from OPOC. I'm not sure what.
So concerns were raised in OPOC around access.
Oh, so like waiting time and things like that nature?
Yep.
Okay,
so
yeah. And one of the things to think about too in, you know, where exactly does it start? Again, thinking about what you can influence, but I'll give you an example. I worked with a primary care team at one point in time that was worried about late arrivals to appointments. And so they couldn't really understand why people were late. They you know, they were trying all kinds of things, like they tried some some crazy things. But anyways, what they ended up doing is they decided to map the process from the time that, not from the time that the person made the appointment, from the time that the person actually arrived for the appointment. And what they recognized was that they were on a very busy street, and where the people had to park in order to get to their appointment, they had to park across the street. But because the street was very busy, they actually had to go up the street to the corner, cross over at a crosswalk, walk back down, and come in their facility. And that was taking up to 5 minutes extra. So they couldn't, in that case, they couldn't necessarily change that. They couldn't get a sidewalk put in front of their place. They couldn't park on site. But what they did do was begin to say to people, your appointment's at 11, please arrive at 10:55. As you'll remember, the parking is across the street and it is a bit of a walk. And so that was their way of being able to manage that piece, was just by giving people more information, because they couldn't move the parking lot. So in that case, we did actually start with when people arrived for their appointment, because it was important if we could see if we could do something about that.
A comment and a question have appeared in the chat box. First, a comment from Chris Babcock saying that she's completed a process map on participant journey through a particular program, highlighting decision-making points in care. And this is for question 16. For those of you who are unfamiliar, question 16 is the one about knowing how to make a complaint if one was inclined to do so. And then a question from Judy. Maybe Alice, you can address this. How do you record and adjust for mitigating factors? For example, like that scenario where a child has a reaction to the smell of the green bin, or for example, a client who is not predictable to show up for an appointment and so on. How can that be displayed or showed, or part of the process map exercise?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple things to think about. One is to think about, is that an exception to the rule, or is that something that happens 80% of the time? In the example of the child in the green bin, that was happening every time she went to the green bin, so that was an issue. If it's one client, is that significant enough? Is that 80? I shouldn't say significant. Is it significant enough to the process? Is that at 80% of the time? If it is, it might suggest an opportunity for improvement, because it suggests there's variation, right? That not everybody this process is not being experienced the same way to everyone. And then I would look at that as an opportunity for improvement. So if our goal is to smooth this out, to make it the same, or the same experience for everyone, how can we address any of those mitigating factors? But the first conversation would be to decide, is this an 80% of the time thing?
Yeah, good point. Debbie suggests, thinking creatively about what could be done. Tweak as needed.
The other thing too that you might want to understand is maybe you do need to get a handle on whether it's 80%. So if you go, oh no, that only happens rarely, and then you go, I think, might be worth going back and collecting some data to help inform your process map to see whether or not your assumption that doesn't happen very often is true or not. Because maybe you are making an assumption, and maybe it does happen more often than you think. But at least by going back and getting the data on the occurrences of whatever it is you're concerned about will help you to understand if there is a good opportunity for improvement for the 80% there. And it may also be something, I'll say one more thing about this, may also be something that you don't do initially because it's not having, what's the biggest impact you can have? It may not be the biggest impact, but is it something that you address a little later on? Because it's still significant, still impacting, your process or your client's or tenant's experience, but it's not a number one. Maybe it's B, C, or D, and that's okay. You go at it later. Just give some examples of ways we thought that you might be able to use process mapping. You could process map the process of collecting OPOC responses. And maybe that helps you to learn from each other. If some are having, a greater completion rate than others, if you needed to, suddenly you're switching to the OPOC for use in virtual care, and you want to think about how that is different from the previous way that you collected OPOC in a face-to-face, you might want to have a look at that and do some contrast and compare. You might want to have people, let's say it is a process perhaps this is an example of one that can have some variation, that it can work different ways for different people. Still map it, because there's a lot to be learned from the fact that people are having success by doing this in multiple ways and still coming out with the same end result. Let's think about that. Maybe there's something to be learned from each other. And interesting that question 16 was mentioned, because that was the other thing that we thought about, that this might be a good opportunity that you map based on your OPOC data responses. You know, so question 16, let's say you're concerned about your responses to their ability or their understanding of how to make a complaint. But you thought it was okay, you thought it was pretty clear. Well, let's map it out with some clients or tenants involved so that we can understand, is what we believe to be true, what the person experiencing the process actually believes to be true, and what are our opportunities for improvement.
I just want to acknowledge that I did miss a question a few moments ago from Rue, writing, haven't started OPOC yet, but it would be useful to process map this, you know, I guess the exercise for the future, and she confirms, or it's confirmed that, you know, you've been answering her question, that there is value in mapping out a future desired process, even though something has not yet begun, right?
Yes, yes. If you're starting something new, then you don't have a current state to map, right? And you do just be sure that you know, when you're mapping future state for something new, be sure you have a way of checking your assumptions. And it may mean, you know, going step by step. It may mean some deeper consultation, because you're creating something that is theoretical. And so you want to be sure that you don't get too far down the road in theoretical before you've had a chance to actually test it out. So I would think you'd have many more smaller tests of change in creating something. And that's okay.
Maybe just invite one more question. We're getting close to the top of the hour, and I know we have a closeout to get through as well. So if one question shows up now, we can address it. If not, maybe we'll move on to the next the closeout.
Going once, going twice, on we go. So just to give you some sort of real life pictures of process maps, as you know, I was messy here. I want to encourage you to be messy, because messy says it's okay to move things around. It's okay to draw lines. In this particular example, those purple stickies were all opportunities for improvement that were identified. So there was a bit of a brainstorming, brain showering exercise going on down the left-hand side there. That was identifying opportunities, and the pinks were pain points. They were things that weren't working well. And you'll see the use of squares, and then squares turn to make triangles to make decision points as well. Here's another example where they actually began to collect data, and they actually brought in some of their other quality improvement tools that they've been using. So they have a fishbone. This is a fishbone up here. They had done a spaghetti diagram. They had looked at how people moved in the process, and they had also put some of their data here, and they had taken some pictures. There was some possibilities for physical improvements in this one, so they had taken some pictures. So this was like a one-stop shop quality improvement diagnostic dashboard, I guess, that people found really helpful. They had done a bit of a democracy in terms of voting for where they wanted to look at improvements first. You'll see the little dots. This became a real, this needed to be framed when it was done. This became such a one-stop shop. It was fantastic. Just, you know, showing you how you could, reminding you back to our grocery shopping, how you could put your emotional mapping on top of a process map. Maybe in particular, if it's something around client experience that you are trying to be focused on, perhaps that's a layer that you want to put on, other than just pain points around, I don't like to wait. How do you feel? How do you feel at that certain process? Oh, my lovely little animation for our little trip to the store here. You know, certainly made the point about analyzing the map, how important that is, and make sure that you walk the process so you verify what you have mapped, and walk it with somebody who knows it, right? Sit in the receptionist's chair, talk to your clients, talk to your tenants about the process, live it for a period of time. And we did that. We've talked about how we use the information, so I think we're at that wrap-up point. And Rishi, I think you are going to do our wrap-up today.
Yes, thank you, Alice, for the wonderful presentation. I'm sure all the participants must have really enjoyed, and thank you for the wonderful, the great participation with in the chat box doing the virtual exercise of process mapping. I'm pretty sure everybody must have a great experience. So here is a recap, and for those who have missed and those who will like to hear back once more, we will have one more similar process mapping next month, August 15th, and all the participants will be getting resources and the slides and the recording in their email. So look for that. Next slide, please, Alice, considering we are running out of time. So we have plenty of resources on our E-QIP site. You are free to and welcome to join the community of practice on Quorum. And we have a very great social media presence on Twitter. So tag us along and follow us on Twitter. Next slide, please, Alice. For those of you who have missed the previous webinars, we have a YouTube channel where you can see all those recordings. So please do have a glimpse. Please join on the newsletter and to keep track of our future offerings. We value your opinion so please participate in providing your feedback with the survey. And thank you for your time and have a great afternoon, and the rest of we'll see you in a month's time. So have a wonderful summer. Stay safe, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your day.